Thank you, Senator Cantwell. Senator Daines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In Montana, tribes are getting hit with massive fines because of the Obamacare employer mandate. For example, the Blackfeet tribe is going to face $1.1 million in penalties. The Crow tribe will be hit with a $1.6 million penalty unless something changes. I've introduced the Tribal Employment and Jobs Protection Act, which will exempt tribes and tribal employers from the Obamacare employer mandate and prevent these unreasonable, I would argue, outrageous fines. The National Congress of American Indians and the National Indian Health Board have endorsed this bill. And while the President recognizes the impact of Obamacare on many and has requested changes to other related provisions like the Cadillac tax, he fails to be concerned with the employer mandate's heavy impact on tribes and Indian country. For Secretary Payment, a question. Could you speak to the burden that the employer mandate places on tribes and the need for this legislation to exempt them from this mandate?
That question is catered to me because I have been echoing this and speaking loudly on this issue. So for my tribe in particular, as an example, so I'm here to speak for NCI, but I do have an example. The cost for the full implementation of the employer mandate is likely to be about $3 million for my tribe. So we're beginning to see some of the gains under the Affordable Care Act and the reauthorization of the IHS under the Affordable Care Act. So we are grateful for the Affordable Care Act and IHS permanent reauthorization, but we are seeing some of the gains we received be erased because of the consequence of the employer mandate. Probably more importantly, on a broader sense, and we've met with representatives from the White House, is that we need to understand the full impact and the unintended consequences before implementation, not afterwards. And so we've asked for that. There's a diversity of the way that funding gets to Indian tribes, through direct service tribes, through self-governance tribes. So then there's also tribes have insurances, and some tribes don't have insurance. So there's a very complex maze to figure out what the unintended consequence is going to be. But I would venture to best it's probably over $50 million in Indian country, the negative consequence of the implementation of the employer mandate. I would ask that this be put on hold until after we do consultation with tribes and we fully appreciate what the full costs are going to be.
Thank you, Secretary Payment. I want to shift gears and talk about wildfires. In 2015, Montana experienced one of its worst fire seasons, and Montana tribal reservations were no exception. In fact, the fires in the Blackfeet Reservation were so severe, the tribe opened a separate facility for elders and those with special health needs who had been displaced by area wildfires. Now, here's one of the challenges. Oftentimes, these fires start on federal lands and then spread to tribal lands. The Tribal Forest Protection Act of 2004 did attempt to address that problem, and a proposal passed the House to provide tribes more freedom to protect tribal trust resources from wildfires through active management. My question for Mr. Roberts, do you support increasing tribes' authority to more actively manage tribal trust forest lands and the neighboring federal forest lands?
Thank you for the question, Senator Daines. I personally am not familiar with that act, but I am generally supportive of obviously greater tribal self-determination, tribal sovereignty, and I understand that the act is particularly focused on the Department of Agriculture. So I understand that it does provide deadlines for certain types of funding to be provided to tribes. I think generally we're supportive of deadlines, and so I would like to talk more with my colleagues at the Department of Agriculture and maybe circle back with your staff on questions that we might have.
We saw some very clear examples on where there was proper forest treatment and active management. We actually could stop some of these fires here from spreading, but as you know, wildfires are not a respecter of boundaries.
Sure.
And that interface is very important. So what I'd like is get your commitment to work with me and with the USDA to address these tribal forestry issues. Can I get that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.